in case you haven't been tuned in over the weekend, Florida apparently doesn't understand the concept of NIL because it is very important for you if you make a promise of NIL cash to actually pay that. It's kind of like the Seinfeld episode and you take a car reservation. Sure, you can take the reservation all day long, but that's really not the most important aspect of the transaction. The most important aspect of the transaction is having the car there. And I've been down this road. That is the most important thing. So if you make a promise of X amount of dollars, it's very important to have the money there. So this tells you this is as big a buffoonery as the whole Greg Schiano thing. This is every bit as embarrassing and hurtful to Florida's program as what Tennessee went through with Jeremy Pruitt, giving people money, players money when he wasn't allowed to yet. This is something that is going to continue to haunt Florida for at least one recruiting cycle, if not two, if not three. If I'm a Florida kid and I want to stay in state and I get promises of NIL money from Miami and Florida State and Florida, I'm not going to be a Gator because I'm pretty scared about what I have seen because the Gator Collective is about as dependable as Southwest Airlines. I just believe that this hurts Florida for a long, long time. And let me give a little bit of background. He shows up on campus, Jaden Rashada, and he'd been a long time Miami lean / quiet commit. And Florida talks him out of it. He shows up. He's supposed to get $13 million, and it's not there. And you could say, well, maybe he's on a payment plan like a GMC Yukon. No, doesn't really work like that because he could show up, suffer an injury, and then he's out to 13 million. He could show up and be terrible. Doesn't matter. You promised him the 13 million. Same thing with Nico. Nico apparently is very happy. He's getting his cash. He showed up at a function right after signing day, the early signing day. Caleb, how disastrous is this for Florida recruiting, especially by Billy Napier, supposed to be detail oriented? Good gracious, I heard that all through SEC media days. This is a fiasco.
Yeah, I agree. As a matter, well, let's get to that. Billy Napier's selling point, like you said, was he was the CEO of a program. He can run the program like an organized CEO. He's not doing that, guys. There have been a lot of disasters already with Florida. And this is the biggest one, and this is embarrassing. And I pulled up On 3. This was last year, right before the season started. The top 5 most ambitious NIL initiatives. Spire Sports Group with Tennessee was number 1. That's why we're all big believers in Tennessee's future because of NIL. Florida's Gator Collective was number 5. They have the 5th largest NIL initiative, and they can't even get their money right on what to pay players. And you brought up a huge point. I've said for a while, one of the problems at a place like Florida or a place like Texas, where they're in fertile recruiting states, is yes, those states are fertile, but you're competing with a lot of schools. You're competing with Florida State. You're competing with Miami. You're about to compete with UCF, which is about to be Power 5. And for the record, I don't know if people know this, UCF is the largest school in the state of Florida by far.
It's kind of in the wrong place.
Orlando?
I guess that is. I'm thinking of South Florida. Sorry, South Florida is in Tampa, which makes no sense. That's not
yes, exactly. Central Florida's in Orlando, and South Florida's in Tampa.
Central Florida is fine. It's in muggy, hellish Orlando.
Yeah, but current Tennessee athletic director Danny White built an epic stadium there. I think they're gonna have like a pool in the back, like a part of the state. It's going to be a cool stadium. So Central Florida is a program of the future. There's a lot of people to compete with. Miami has the 2nd largest NIL initiative. It's not even a group. It's John Ruiz. I don't know who that is. Apparently he's an attorney that's worth a few $1 billion that just throws money at people. And so
I thought he was the dude that got in a little bit of trouble, but I don't want to say
That's
that.
Nevin Shapiro.
Oh, Nevin Shapiro. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah. So Miami has the second largest NIL initiative. Florida has the fifth. Florida's NIL initiative is a massive embarrassment now. They need to recruit some South Florida speed to be the powerhouse program that you expect Florida to be. You think they're going to be getting kids out of Miami anytime soon after this happened?
No.
Yeah.
You
Right.
think that, and how about, the other place they love to recruit is North Carolina. The previous coaches, despite their win-loss record or lack thereof, had great success in North Carolina. You think those guys are going to go there? You think those guys from even if they try to get into South Carolina are going to go there? This is huge. I mean, this will have an impact on their signing day coming up, the second signing day, which I know is minuscule compared to the first signing day, but it's going to have an effect on their signing day for at least one recruiting cycle, if not more. This is a monstrous disaster by the University of Florida. And I'll say this, I don't know where you're getting your figures from, but I was told about a year ago that they were really behind. And it sounds like to me, based off your figures and what I was told a year ago, that they cobbled stuff together and inflated their numbers, which would explain, which would explain why they can't pay the kid $13 million.
This is like what we call on Wall Street, we would call this fraud. This is somebody cooking their books to inflate their stock. This is what this is.
This is the Bernie Madoff of the SEC. I've been incredibly obsessed with the financial crash of 2008 for some reason. I've watched like 4 documentaries over the past few days. But the absolute worst at the center of it was Bernie Madoff. He never even made one investment with the $62 billion he took in. He did not make one investment for any of his clients from 88 to 2008. He just spent it all. So I don't know what they're spending money on in Gainesville. Perhaps it's jorts. Perhaps it's hair gel. I don't know. But if it's one of those, if it's one of those two things, it ain't Jaden Rashada. And I just am still stunned how that shook out. How you could have that first meeting, okay, and say, Jaden, we got a little problem. We weren't planning on giving you the money till then. And he says, well, I'm going to walk if you don't give me the money. Then you find a way to get the money in the next 48 hours. You think if something went south with Nico, let's just say, for instance, Pilot was the Nico guy. Okay, let's just for instance, and I don't think that's the case. And Pilot sold out to Casey's, which they have, and they're no longer involved. The University of Tennessee would have the wherewithal to be able to find the cash to pay Nico what they had promised him. Florida's is not.
I got a story. I just read more into this while we were talking because I did the list on the NIL initiatives. Dave, what you said is exactly right. You ready for this story on how they pull their NIL together?
Yes.
So sports attorney and NIL pioneer Darren Heltner received a message from former Florida baseball player Eddie Rojas on July 1st last summer. Rojas was responsible for cobbling together a bunch of boosters to have the 5th largest NIL collective. They started that on July 1st. This article came out in August. How in the world did they just out of the blue in 1 month have the 5th largest NIL collective? That's not possible unless they weren't thinking things through and just threw it together.
Here's the other thing to remember. This is just simple socioeconomic demographics. Florida was a nobody in the 80s and before. So let's say the people that are my age that were in their 20s in the 90s watching the Tennessee-Florida series. So they should be in buying positions in their mid-40s at this point. But there's just not going to be as many of them. I mean, Tennessee and Alabama and Georgia, they go back 50, 100 years. So there's Haslams floating around out there that are 70 plus years old. There's all kinds of people that feel a greater tug, a greater pull to the University of Tennessee than there is Florida. Let's not forget, in the grand scheme of things, Florida is still at the kids' table. I know that sounds crazy with Urban Meyer and Steve Spurrier and what they did, but they're still at the kids' table in terms of programs in the SEC.
And not only that, they didn't really emerge until Miami really fell off in the 90s because Miami started to get in some trouble by then. And that's when Spurrier was able to get some South Florida kids to run his fun and gun. Also, Florida, Dave, we talk about this a lot too, on whether or not you can be a program that just recruits talent or has a cutting edge offense that has to be creative. Florida, despite being in Florida, has to be creative. They've won their 3 national titles with coaches running an offense that the SEC hadn't caught up with yet. All 3 national titles were because of that. And I don't think Florida is a school that can do the standard pro-style offense, uncreative, focus on defense and loading up on talent. They can't do what Alabama and Georgia can do because there's too much competition in that state. Which, by the way, that's why South Carolina is in trouble, because you shouldn't be hiring NFL offensive coordinators to coach your program. You need a creative offense, Shane Beamer. Sorry.
No, I agree. I mean, the argument would be that they can get you ready for the NFL, but you're right. They can build something special in defense just based off talent. But that's why I thought Dan Mullen was a perfect fit there, and apparently I was wrong, although I'm told he got a bit of a raw deal there because he was an offensive mind. So basically you just fill in the defensive talent, and he's able to get people open. I did not realize that his offense was so simplistic because I didn't watch a lot of Mississippi State, just to be real honest with you.
Vols he was the brains behind Urban Meyer.
What's that?
He was the brains behind Urban Meyer's success at Florida in the 2000s.
He was, no doubt about it. Vols Automotive Group, the epicenter of car buying there in the Knoxville area. It's on Calhoun. You'll love Vols Automotive Group. Just phenomenal, man. Vols Automotive Group, they want, they need, and they appreciate your business. And the best part about it is you're being treated fairly. Same thing with their service department. You're not going to go in and say, I think my starter's out. They say, oh, you need a whole new engine. That's not the way they work. Vols Automotive Group, they want, they need, and they appreciate your business. So I wonder if this stuff starts to crop up elsewhere, or if Florida is just the worst. I mean, right now, if you had to rank them, Florida is the absolute worst NIL program in the history of man, because they didn't have it put together 8 months ago, and now that they supposedly have it put together, they can't make their payment.
Well, this is chickens coming home to roost. We know from the Urban Meyer days, Florida is a program that just does not care about things that you should be caring about. With Urban Meyer, it was, we don't care if our players are murderers or criminals or threatening to kill their girlfriends or trying to, in Brandon Spike's case, blind a player on the field, trying to gouge his eyes out. and
I know that we have a lot of Tennessee fans, and I guess Sam, who was saying I was just trying to poke the bear to get people more interested, which, again, I don't do. I'll tell you this. I was following a prospect recently because his recruiting was getting kind of interesting. He was thinking about Tennessee, and I was following it. And he went to Florida before he visited Tennessee. And Caleb, he took his phone and did kind of a panoramic shot of Florida's workout facility. No joke. I could, if I wanted to invest the money, could add on to my house and have a better workout facility than Florida had compared to Tennessee's. And I don't know if you've seen it in person, but the new one, there's just no comparison.
Well, Florida right now is where Tennessee was in the 70s, which is funny because Tennessee is the older program. But Tennessee in the 70s was, remember, they were, don't you know, we're Tennessee. We don't need facilities. We don't need lights at Neyland Stadium, which they refused to put in until the 70s. And I've heard stories that when Johnny Majors got to Tennessee, I mean, he sacrificed years of winning to make sure the facilities were up to snuff because he was really upset about the situation that they had just not cared for years. And so we got to give Johnny Majors some credit on this. Johnny Majors actually was the one who really committed Tennessee to getting ahead of the curve and recruiting nationally, building up-to-date facilities, and building and increasing their stadium size. And they, in the 90s, that's what helped them. Other schools kind of caught up in the 2000s, but Tennessee's always tried to stay ahead of the curve now on facilities and things like that ever since then.
Okay. You have to write that column at some point. I want to read that because for those that don't know, they're just tuning in. Caleb is the most incredible person in Tennessee football history that's ever been. So, I mean, you really are. The difference is Johnny Majors was a beloved son. College football, the money had not gotten outrageous. So you could hang with the Johnny Majors, which they arguably did too long. You can
Yes.
hang with him and let him grow it. You can't pay a guy like a Napier, whatever he's getting paid, 5-6 million, whatever it is. You can't pay a guy that much money, and he's not a beloved son of Florida, and wait for him to fix things. You're not going to do that. So you go from Meyer had his own issues. You go from a Meyer, a Zook, a Mullen, and now a Napier. How does Florida get better? How do they build things? I mean, Steve Spurrier, when he went to South Carolina, he hated these things, but he went to all these groups and all these booster groups, and he got their facilities upgraded overnight. Are you telling me Billy Napier, with the way he carries himself, he walks into a booster club and somebody says, I got to throw $100 million at that guy? Heck no.
No, nobody's going to do that with Billy Napier. You're right. He's going to have to schmooze the boosters and golf with the boosters. And you're right. And that was Johnny Majors' best selling point, was Johnny Majors did not care what Tennessee boosters thought. He was not going to kowtow to them. And he kind of had the leverage to do that for a long time. And you're right. Billy Napier he's going to have to beg for that support. And I'm with you. I'm seeing a lot, I think they thought they were getting Nick Saban. I'm seeing a lot more Derek Dooley than Nick Saban and Billy Napier.
Well, I'm not seeing any Nick Saban and Billy Napier. The thing about Johnny Majors is he was great with the boosters because he would only go 2 cocktails deep. It was after that in the late 90s or late 80s and early 90s where he would get 4 or 5 cocktails deep and tell the boosters what he really thought about them. And then that went in a different direction. God rest his soul. I love that man. The only person I called coach my whole life, because the other guys aren't my coach.
And let's not forget the credibility Majors had, not just as Tennessee's favorite son, but he had just won a national championship at Pitt when he got hired. So he had the credibility as a coach and as a beloved son. It would be like if Tim Tebow for Florida, if Tim Tebow becomes a head coach and wins a national title somewhere, and then they hire him, he's got 20 years of goodwill before they even come close to firing him.